Think about Robert. He's 71, lives in Sheffield, retired 6 years ago. He has a defined contribution pension pot he's never touched, just over £145,000. His plan, from the moment he retired, was simple. Leave it to his 2 daughters.
He'd read, somewhere along the way, that pension pots pass outside the estate. No inheritance tax. The trustees follow your nomination form, the money goes to your family, and HMRC never sees it. He told his daughters the same thing. He filled in the nomination form. He thought he'd done everything right. He hadn't heard of the Finance Act 2026. On the 18th of March, 2026, that act received royal assent. From the 6th of April, 2027, which is considerably closer than it sounds, most unused defined contribution pension pots in the United Kingdom will be pulled into the taxable estate for the first time.
The rule that Robert built his plan around will no longer exist. Not yet, but it will. What changed, exactly? Why now? And what, if anything, can you do between now and April 2027? That's what this covers. Not a broad lecture on inheritance tax, this specific change. What it means for people who thought their pension was protected, and what the options actually look like from here. First, the background, because you can't understand what changed without understanding what existed before. Until very recently, a defined contribution pension pot was the cleanest asset you could leave behind. It sat entirely outside your estate. No inheritance tax applied to it. You completed a nomination form, naming who you wanted to receive it, and the pension trustees followed it. The money went to your children, your grandchildren, whoever you'd named. HMRC received nothing. For anyone building an estate plan, this made the pension the obvious place to leave the last of your wealth. Spend the ISA first, draw down the savings, let the pension sit, pass it on clean.
The government noticed. In the Autumn Budget 2024, they announced this would end. The Finance Act 2026 is the legislation that makes it law.
From the 6th of April, 2027, most unused defined contribution pension funds, SIPPs, personal pensions, and most workplace DC schemes will be added to the value of your estate when you die. The combined total will then be measured against your nil rate band. Anything above the threshold is taxed at 40%. The nil rate band is £325,000. It has been frozen at that figure since April 2009. It was frozen again in the 2025 budget. It will remain frozen until at least April 2031.
That is 22 years at the same number, while house prices have roughly doubled, and pension pots have grown with investment markets. I want to be precise about what this means, because a lot of what's been written about this change has either overstated or understated it.
The pension is not automatically taxed at 40%. What the rule does is add your pension pot to everything else you own at the moment of death. Your property, your savings, your investments, and now your pension.
The combined value is what gets measured against the threshold. If the total falls below £325,000, nothing changes. The 40% only applies to the amount above that line. But here's where it becomes relevant to ordinary families. The median defined contribution pension pot for someone aged 65 to 74 is £145,900, according to the ONS Wealth and Assets Survey. Add a paid-off house, even a modest one outside London, and savings, and many people are already above the nil rate band before the pension is included. The pension tips them further over. There is an additional allowance for people leaving a home to their children or grandchildren, the residence nil rate band, currently £175,000. A single person can effectively shelter up to £500,000 from inheritance tax. A married couple with both allowances in play can reach £1 million, but the pension, from April 2027, sits on top of all of that. Now, some important limits on who this affects and how. Death in service benefits paid from a registered pension scheme are not included in these changes.
If your employer provides life cover through your pension, that remains outside the estate under these rules. The spousal exemption continues.
Assets passing to a surviving spouse or civil partner, including pension funds, remain exempt from inheritance tax. The change lands hardest at the second death, when the combined estate passes to the next generation. And this is the part that deserves more attention than it is getting.
If you die after 75, your pension beneficiaries already face income tax on what they withdraw from the inherited pot at their own marginal rate. Under the new rules, the same pot may also face inheritance tax before a single pound is withdrawn.
The government has included relief mechanisms to prevent full double taxation, but the exact mechanics are still being finalized in secondary legislation, and HMRC has confirmed further guidance will follow before April 2027. What this means in practice: the problem is real, the protection is coming, the detail is not yet settled. But here is what most of the coverage on this change has missed. The pension was the last clean vehicle, the one asset that careful people who had taken advice, who had done everything they were told, hadn't thought to worry about. The ISA has a limit. The annual gift allowance has rules. Property has its own complexities. But the pension sat quietly outside the estate, year after year. It won't. Not after April 2027. The entire picture of what an estate looks like and what it costs to pass on has changed. So what can you actually do between now and April 2027? 3 things worth examining, not prescriptions, because every situation is different, but starting points. The first is your nomination form. This won't change the tax position under the new rules, but it determines who receives the pension, in what shares, and with what speed. An out-of-date form, one that names an ex-spouse, fails to reflect a bereavement in the family, or hasn't been reviewed in a decade, can create complications that compound the tax problem rather than reduce it. Contact your pension provider. Request the current form. Read it, and update it if anything no longer reflects your intentions. The second is knowing what your combined estate actually looks like. Take your pension pot. Add your property value, your savings, your investments. Compare that figure to the nil rate band, £325,000 for a single person, or a combined £650,000 for a couple with both allowances available. If you are approaching that threshold, this rule is directly relevant to your planning. If you are well below it, the immediate impact is limited, though the long-term pattern of frozen thresholds and rising asset values is worth tracking.
The third, and this is the one most people don't know about, is the gifts from normal expenditure out of income exemption. If you have surplus income, gifts made from that genuine surplus are immediately exempt from inheritance tax.
No 7-year clock, no taper, no threshold. Documented properly, this is the cleanest tool in the toolkit. It is also the one HMRC scrutinizes most carefully, which means the record-keeping has to be done properly. A conversation with a regulated IFA or an estate planning solicitor is the right starting point, not a form to fill in yourself. The annual gift exemption continues alongside all of this. £3,000 per person per year, carrying forward 1 year if unused. A couple, both giving with 1 year's carry forward, can move £12,000 in a single tax year completely outside the estate. That is not a negligible amount over time. And that brings us back to Robert. When he understood what was changing, he didn't panic. He rang his daughter. They sat down together and looked at the numbers. Really looked at them. For the first time. The pension pot, the house in Sheffield, the savings account. What they found was that his combined estate was closer to the threshold than either of them had assumed. Not because he'd done anything wrong, because the threshold hadn't moved in 22 years, and everything else had. He needed to update his nomination form. He needed a conversation with an IFA. He needed to know about the gifts from income exemption.
He didn't need a dramatic plan. He needed the information to have that conversation. Now you have it.
As I always say, I'm not a regulated financial advisor. Nothing in this video is personal advice. If your situation is complex, a large estate, pension pots across multiple schemes, assets held abroad, the right place to take it is a qualified independent financial advisor or an estate planning solicitor. PensionWise is free and government-backed.